They came to kidnap the widow, but her old flame turned his gun on her, not the outlaws. The morning sun stretched its golden fingers across the small town of Cedar Hollow, painting the streets in soft light. Birds chirped in the distance, and the faint smell of smoke from chimneys drifted through the air. Clara, a widow in her early 30s, moved quietly around her modest farmhouse, her hands busy with the chores her late husband had once shared with her. She tied up bundles of firewood, fed the chickens, and checked on her small vegetable garden. Each task was familiar, almost soothing, but today there was a tension in the air she couldn't ignore. Something was off. Clara had lived in Cedar Hollow her entire life. She knew the rhythms of the town, the creak of the old wooden bridge over the creek, the sound of horses clopping along the dusty main street, and the way the wind whispered through the fields in the late afternoon. Her husband had died 2 years ago, leaving her to manage the farm alone. She had grieved quietly, tending to the land as though the soil itself could absorb her sadness. In time she had grown accustomed to the quiet, the solitude. But solitude could be dangerous when the world was changing around you, and Clara had begun to notice signs of trouble. The town had been abuzz with stories of a gang of outlaws moving through the nearby hills. They were known for kidnapping women, taking them for ransom, and leaving terror in their wake. People whispered their names in fear, and the older women in town warned their daughters not to wander alone. Clara had tried to ignore the rumors at first, believing that such danger was far from her quiet farm. But over the past few weeks, small signs began to appear: broken fences, missing livestock, and the occasional shadow moving too quickly in the fields at night. Her instincts told her that these were not random accidents. One morning, as Clara carried a bucket of water from the well to the barn, she paused and scanned the horizon. The hills that surrounded her property were green with early spring growth, but she thought she saw movement among the trees, quick and deliberate. Her heart raced, and she set the bucket down with more force than necessary. Clara knew the stories of the gang, and even though she tried to push the fear aside, it lingered, like smoke in a closed room. As she returned to the farmhouse, her mind wandered to James. James had been her first love, the man who had captured her heart when they were teenagers. He had left town years ago, chasing a life she could not follow. Now he had returned, though she wasn't sure why. She had seen him in the town square a few days ago, leaning casually against the wooden railing of the general store, watching the world with calm, confident eyes. The sight of him stirred something she had buried deep within herself, memories of laughter, of shared dreams, and of promises made but never kept. James had changed, Clara noticed. He carried himself with a quiet authority, and there was a hardness in his eyes, a reflection of the experiences he had lived through. He was no longer the boy she had known, but there was a familiarity in his voice, a warmth that made her pulse quicken. She had resisted speaking to him, unsure if she could face the emotions his presence stirred. But now, with the threat of the outlaws approaching, she found herself wishing he was near. The morning passed slowly, each sound carrying a weight she could not shake. The clatter of a wagon on the main street, the lowing of a cow in the pasture, even the soft cooing of doves on the roof. It all seemed louder, more urgent. Clara moved through her day with efficiency, preparing meals, tending her animals, and keeping an eye on the horizon. She noticed how the wind shifted in the valley below, carrying scents from the distant hills. Every small detail became a signal, a clue that she tried to interpret. By mid-afternoon, Clara had finished her chores and decided to take a short walk along the edge of her property. The grass was still damp with morning dew, and her boots sank slightly into the soft earth. She kept her eyes on the tree line, looking for any sign of movement. The sun was warm on her back, and for a brief moment, she felt a flicker of peace. But then, she heard it, a faint rustle, like someone moving through the brush. Clara froze, her breath catching in her throat. She listened carefully, straining to catch any other sound. Her thoughts immediately went to the stories she had heard. Could it be the gang? She did not want to panic, but her heart pounded with fear. She turned slowly, scanning the horizon, but saw nothing. The movement had stopped, leaving only the whisper of the wind in the trees. Clara knew she could not ignore the signs anymore. She needed help, but the town was miles away, and she was alone. As she made her way back to the farmhouse, she remembered the last time she had seen James. He had been in town for only a few days, yet he seemed to know everything that had happened while he was away. Perhaps, she thought, he could help. But she hesitated. She did not know if she could trust him fully after all these years. The memories of their past, the broken promises, and the wounds of separation were still fresh. Yet the thought of facing the threat alone was unbearable. That evening, as the sun dipped below the hills and cast long shadows across the fields, Clara prepared for nightfall. She lit a lantern inside the farmhouse and set it on the kitchen table, the warm glow casting a soft light across the room. She checked the doors and windows, making sure they were secure, and arranged a chair near the entrance, ready to defend herself if necessary. Her hands shook slightly, but she refused to let fear control her actions. She had survived loss before. She could survive this. The night was quiet at first. The crickets sang, and the occasional hoot of an owl punctuated the darkness. Clara sat near the door, her eyes scanning the windows, every sound amplified in the stillness. Hours passed slowly, the tension coiling in her chest. She thought of James again, wondering where he was, what he was doing, and if he had any idea of the danger she faced. The thought gave her both comfort and anxiety. Comfort that someone she trusted might intervene, and anxiety over whether he would arrive in time. Then, a shadow moved across the edge of the property. Clara's heart leaped into her throat. She held her breath, straining to see. The shadow shifted, and she glimpsed a figure approaching, tall and steady. Her mind raced. Could it be James? Or was it someone else entirely? The figure stepped into the lantern light near the edge of the porch, and Clara gasped. It was James. His eyes met hers immediately, and she felt a mixture of relief and confusion. He was here. But why had he come? James did not speak at first. He took in the scene, the farmhouse, the surrounding fields, and Clara herself. His gaze was intense but not unkind. Clara noticed the gun at his side, the careful way he moved, and the determination in his stance. She realized that he had come to protect her, though the unspoken question remained. Did he trust her to be safe, or was there another motive behind his sudden appearance? James finally spoke, his voice calm but edged with concern. He asked Clara if she had noticed any unusual activity, if there had been any signs of the gang. Clara nodded, describing the broken fence, the missing livestock, and the strange movements she had seen earlier. James listened carefully, absorbing each detail, and then gave her instructions to stay inside while he surveyed the perimeter. Clara obeyed, watching as he moved silently through the darkness, every step deliberate and cautious. The hours passed with tense anticipation. Clara tried to busy herself with small tasks, but her mind kept drifting to James and the threat that loomed outside. She realized how much she had missed having someone watch over her, someone who cared enough to risk themselves for her safety. Memories of their past together filled her mind, the laughter, the stolen glances, and the moments of shared vulnerability. She had loved him once, and though time had created distance, those feelings lingered beneath the surface. Finally, James returned to the porch, his expression unreadable. He assured Clara that the immediate area was clear, though he warned that the threat was still near. He stayed with her through the night, keeping watch and ensuring she felt safe. Clara felt a mixture of gratitude, fear, and a rekindled emotion she had tried to suppress. She realized that their story was far from over, and that the past and present were about to collide in ways she could not yet imagine. As the first light of dawn touched the hills, Clara and James sat together on the porch, the quiet of the early morning surrounding them. The tension of the night had not fully lifted, but for the first time in a long while, Clara felt a glimmer of hope. She was not entirely alone, and perhaps, with James by her side, she could face whatever challenges lay ahead. The farm was still, the town distant, and the wind carried a promise of both danger and the possibility of renewed connection. Clara knew that the story of her life was entering a new chapter, one where fear and trust, love and loss would intertwine in ways she could not yet predict. And as she watched James carefully survey the horizon once more, she realized that the quiet life she had known was about to change forever. The morning after the long, tense night dawned with a pale light that seemed hesitant to touch the fields of Clara's farm. The wind carried a chill that whispered across the hills, rustling the grass and the loose boards of the old barn. Clara rose early, still unsettled by the events of the previous night. Though James had stayed and watched over her, she could not shake the feeling that danger was near. The shadows in the surrounding hills seemed deeper, and the silence itself felt heavy, like the calm before a storm. Clara went about her chores carefully, moving with deliberate caution. She fed the animals, swept the floors, and checked each door and window for any sign of intrusion. Every sound seemed magnified, the creak of the porch, the soft clatter of a loose shutter, even the fluttering of birds as they moved through the trees. Her nerves were taut, every movement watched by a mind alert to danger. She thought about the gang she had heard of, the men who kidnapped women for ransom, leaving fear and destruction wherever they went. She tried to tell herself that perhaps the danger would pass, that she had been lucky to survive the night, but deep down, she knew luck alone could not protect her for long. James had left before dawn to scout the surrounding area, promising to return with information. Clara tried to focus on her work, but her mind kept wandering to him. She remembered the way he had moved the night before, silent, careful, protective, and the way his eyes had searched the horizon as if nothing could escape his notice. There was a tension in his presence, a mixture of past familiarity and current responsibility that stirred emotions she had long buried. She realized that she still cared deeply for him, despite the years that had passed, despite the distance their lives had created. As the morning wore on, Clara noticed small signs that confirmed her fears. Tracks in the mud, the broken branch of a tree near the edge of the property, and the faint smell of smoke carried from the distant hills. She understood that the gang was nearby, moving closer with each passing hour. The realization filled her with a mixture of fear and determination. She could not run, she had nowhere to go, and the farm was her life. But she could prepare, and she would do everything in her power to survive. By mid-morning, the quiet of the farm was interrupted by the sound of hooves on the dusty lane. Clara looked up from her work in the garden and saw James approaching on horseback. His expression was serious, and the gun at his side was a reminder of the danger that surrounded them. He dismounted swiftly, his boots crunching on the gravel, and approached her with a careful gaze. "Clara," he said softly, "I checked the surrounding area. The gang is closer than we thought. They've been moving through the hills all night. If we don't act carefully, they might strike today." Clara swallowed hard, feeling the weight of his words. "How close?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. James pointed toward the north, where the hills rose sharply. "Too close. I could see their tracks near the creek. They're organized, moving fast, and they know the land. We have to be careful, or they could reach you before we even realize it." Clara nodded, her mind racing. She felt a mixture of fear, frustration, and a strange sense of relief. James was here, and he had a plan. But the knowledge that the gang was so close made the threat feel immediate, almost tangible. She knew she could not face this alone, and for the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to hope that someone would protect her. James spent the next hour helping her reinforce the farmhouse. They secured doors with extra boards, tied ropes across the windows, and even moved furniture to block the entrances. Clara noticed how skilled he was, how natural it seemed for him to take charge without arrogance or unnecessary force. There was a calm authority in his actions, and Clara felt a mixture of admiration and comfort. Yet beneath the surface, she sensed the tension in him, the worry that he might fail, the fear that he could lose her if the gang struck too soon. As they worked, Clara found herself stealing glances at him. Memories of their past flooded her mind. The moments of laughter in the summer fields, the quiet conversations under the stars, the promises they had made to each other when they were young. There was a warmth in her chest, a mixture of longing and gratitude, and she realized that despite the danger, despite the fear, she was glad to see him again. By noon they had finished the preparations, and the farm was as secure as it could be. James suggested they stay alert and avoid unnecessary movement until nightfall, The sun was high in the sky, casting long shadows across the fields, but Clara could not relax. She paced quietly, keeping her eyes on the tree line, listening for the slightest sound that might signal danger. Hours passed slowly, the tension building with each passing moment. Clara tried to focus on small tasks: watering the garden, feeding the animals, checking the fences, but her mind kept returning to the threat outside. Every rustle in the grass, every distant sound, made her heart leap. She realized that the farm, once a place of comfort and familiarity, had become a stage for fear, where every detail mattered and every movement could signal life or danger. As afternoon approached, James returned from another scouting trip. He reported that the gang was moving closer, likely planning to strike that night. He suggested that they be ready to defend the farmhouse, but he also emphasized caution. The outlaws were dangerous, experienced, and unpredictable. Clara listened carefully, absorbing each word. Her fear was tempered by determination. She would not give in to panic. She had survived loss, and she would survive this. The sun began to dip toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the farm. Clara and James moved quietly, checking the perimeter one last time. The wind carried the scent of distant smoke and the faint sound of movement in the hills. Clara's heart raced and she felt the weight of every moment. She realized that the night would bring the true test of their courage, and that the coming hours would decide everything. As darkness fell, Clara prepared herself. She lit lanterns inside the farmhouse, placing them strategically to provide light without drawing attention from outside. She arranged chairs and tables near the entrances, ready to use them as obstacles if necessary. Her hands shook slightly, but she forced herself to focus, drawing strength from her resolve and from James's presence. James stayed close, his eyes scanning the surrounding darkness. He gave Clara instructions in calm, measured tones, guiding her through each step with care. Clara felt a mixture of fear and reassurance. She knew that James cared for her, but she also understood the gravity of the threat. The gang was out there, moving silently through the night, and their intentions were clear. Hours passed with tense anticipation. The crickets sang in the darkness, and the occasional hoot of an owl punctuated the night. Clara moved quietly, checking the doors and windows, listening for any sign of intrusion. Every sound was amplified, every shadow a potential threat. She realized that she could not rely solely on James. She had to be alert, resourceful, and prepared to act. Finally, a distant sound reached Clara's ears. The faint crunch of footsteps in the underbrush, the subtle movement of leaves and branches. Her heart leapt into her throat. James tensed beside her, his hand resting lightly on his gun. The shadows near the tree line shifted, and Clara caught a glimpse of movement, a figure moving closer, deliberate and cautious. The gang had arrived. Clara's mind raced, and she felt a surge of adrenaline. She knew that the coming confrontation would test her courage, her wits, and her ability to survive. James stood ready, his eyes scanning the darkness, but Clara understood that the outcome was uncertain. The gang was skilled, dangerous, and determined, and they had come for her. The night stretched on, each moment filled with tension and anticipation. Clara and James moved carefully, communicating with gestures and whispers, their presence alert and focused. The shadows around the farm seemed to close in, and the faint sounds of movement reminded them of the danger that lurked just beyond the light of the lanterns. And as the hours passed, Clara realized that the quiet life she had known was gone. The farm, the hills, and the town itself were no longer safe, but she also realized something else. She was not entirely alone. James was there, watching, protecting, and sharing the burden of fear and responsibility. Together they would face the threat and perhaps, just perhaps, survive the night. The first part of the battle had passed, the preparation, the vigilance, the quiet anticipation. But the true test was still ahead. Clara's heart pounded, her mind alert, and her resolve firm. She knew that the coming hours would decide everything, and that she would need every ounce of courage, wit, and determination to survive. And in the quiet darkness of her farmhouse, with James at her side. She prepared for the night that would change her life forever. The night had grown thick and heavy over Cedar Hollow. A low wind whispered through the trees, rustling the tall grass and carrying the distant scent of smoke and earth. Clara crouched near the window of her farmhouse, her hands pressed against the wooden sill. Her heart raced, each beat echoing the tension that hung in the darkness. Every sound, the hoot of an owl, the rustle of leaves, even the faint creak of the old farmhouse boards, seemed magnified. The gang was close. She could feel it in the way the night pressed down around her, a presence she could not see, but could sense. James moved silently behind her, his eyes scanning the horizon, gun held loosely but ready. He had instructed Clara to stay inside while he observed the property perimeter, but now that the night had grown darker, he realized the gang could strike at any moment. He could hear the faint crunch of boots on dirt and the soft snap of a branch from the edge of the property. Each sound sharpened his instincts, honed from years of experience. He had known danger before, but seeing Clara vulnerable brought a new urgency to his movements. Clara's mind was a storm of fear, anticipation, and determination. She knew that the gang would not be satisfied with stealing her possessions. They had come for her, and the realization struck her with a cold, sharp edge. Yet she refused to give in to panic. She had survived loss before, she had endured hardship, and she would survive this. She adjusted her position, keeping low and quiet, listening for any change in the sounds outside. Suddenly, a shadow flitted past the edge of the window. Clara's breath caught, and she pressed herself closer to the wall. She could see figures moving through the fields, careful, deliberate, their intentions clear. The gang had arrived. Panic surged, but Clara forced herself to stay calm, drawing strength from the knowledge that James was near. She could hear him moving outside, the faint shift of his weight on the ground, the subtle movements that marked him as a guardian and protector. The outlaws approached the farmhouse slowly, their steps silent but determined. Clara watched as they paused near the barn, speaking in hushed voices, though she could not make out the words. She realized they were sizing up the property, looking for weakness, planning their move. Her pulse pounded as she considered her options. She had to act carefully, and she had to be ready to defend herself. James moved to the side of the house, positioning himself where he could intercept the gang without being seen. He gestured to Clara to stay low, and she nodded, gripping the edge of the window tightly. She could feel the tension in every muscle, the anticipation of confrontation hanging thick in the air. The night seemed to stretch endlessly, each second a test of nerves and courage. The first move came without warning. One of the gang members stepped into the lantern light near the barn, reaching for the latch on the gate. James acted instantly, stepping from the shadows with a shout and a wave of his gun. The figure froze, startled, and the others behind him reacted. For a moment the air was filled with tension, neither side moving, each assessing the other. Clara held her breath, unsure of what would happen next. James spoke in a firm, commanding tone. "Stay where you are. Don't move." The voice carried authority, but also a warning. The gang hesitated, exchanging quick glances. They were confident men, used to controlling situations, but James's presence unsettled them. He had a calm certainty, a readiness that made them pause, reconsider, and rethink their approach. But the situation shifted in a flash. One of the gang members lunged toward the farmhouse, attempting to flank James and reach Clara. James turned sharply, bringing his gun up, but in the heat of the moment his aim wavered. For an instant, the weapon pointed too close to the door where Clara crouched. Fear surged through her as she realized the danger she was in, not just from the gang, but from the very person who had come to protect her. Clara froze, her mind racing. She had to stay calm. She knew that any sudden movement could trigger disaster. She shifted slightly, careful not to draw attention, and whispered under her breath, a prayer for safety and clarity. James noticed immediately, and his eyes softened for a brief moment as he adjusted his aim. He realized the peril his distraction had caused, and his muscles tensed again, ready to act with precision. The gang hesitated, unsure whether to advance or retreat. Their confidence wavered as James positioned himself with careful authority. Clara watched, her heart pounding, as he moved with the skill of someone who had faced danger many times before. She felt a mixture of fear and admiration, knowing that he was risking himself to protect her. Yet there was an edge of unpredictability, a reminder that even heroes could falter in moments of extreme tension. One of the gang members made a sudden move, sprinting toward the barn. James fired a warning shot into the ground, the sound echoing across the fields. The figure froze, and the others exchanged hurried gestures. Clara felt a surge of hope. James was holding them back, keeping them at bay. But the night was far from over, and she knew the gang would not give up easily. In a brief lull, Clara moved to check the doors again, ensuring that they were secure. She could hear James's low voice outside, directing, instructing, and warning. The coordination between them was instinctive, built on trust and necessity. Clara realized that despite the fear, despite the danger, she was not powerless. She had agency, she had awareness, and she had the support of someone who cared deeply for her. Time seemed to stretch endlessly. The gang moved cautiously, testing the boundaries of the property, but James anticipated their every move. Clara watched as he positioned himself with quiet precision, blocking paths and controlling the area with a mix of strategy and instinct. She marveled at his courage, at the way he balanced fear and action, protecting not just her life, but her sense of safety and dignity. Then came the most critical moment. One of the gang members, braver or perhaps more reckless than the others, approached the farmhouse directly. Clara's breath caught, her heart leaping into her throat. James reacted instantly, stepping into the line of sight, gun raised and voice firm. "Stop! Back away!" The man hesitated, but a flicker of fear crossed his face. He had not expected resistance, not such precise and calm resistance. James's stance, the intensity of his gaze, and the way he commanded the space created an unexpected advantage. Clara felt a wave of relief as the man faltered, giving James the upper hand. In the confusion, another figure from the gang tried to circle around, attempting to reach a window. James moved with sharp precision, positioning himself between the intruder and Clara. His gun remained steady, though the moment of previous misalignment had reminded him of the stakes. He could not afford another mistake. The safety of Clara, and perhaps his own sense of honor, depended on him maintaining control. Clara, crouched low near the door, realized she had to act to help. She grabbed a heavy pan from the kitchen table and held it ready, aware that even small actions could make a difference. She listened carefully, waiting for the right moment to act without drawing attention. Her hands were steady, though her heart raced. This was no longer a distant threat. It was immediate, pressing, and dangerous. The confrontation reached its peak as the gang realized they were outmaneuvered. James's calm authority, his positioning, and Clara's careful preparation combined to create a defensive advantage. The gang hesitated, unsure whether to retreat or push forward. In that moment of hesitation, the balance of power shifted decisively in favor of James and Clara. James's voice cut through the night, clear and commanding. "Leave now and you may walk away. Harm her, and you will answer to me." The words carried weight, authority, and a warning that was impossible to ignore. The gang members exchanged glances, their confidence shaken. They had expected an easy target, not a widow prepared and a man determined to protect her. Slowly the figures retreated into the shadows, moving back toward the hills from which they had come. Clara exhaled, her body trembling with relief, adrenaline still coursing through her veins. James lowered his gun but remained alert, scanning the darkness for any sign of renewed threat. He stepped inside the farmhouse carefully, his gaze meeting Clara's. "You're safe for now," he said quietly, though his eyes still held tension. Clara nodded, unable to speak immediately. The fear of the night was still fresh, but so was the sense of relief, of survival, and of shared triumph. They had faced the threat together, and though the danger was not entirely gone, they had prevailed in this moment. As the first light of dawn began to creep across the hills, Clara and James sat together on the porch, catching their breath. The night had tested their courage, their trust, and their resilience. Clara realized that she had survived not by luck alone, but by preparation, presence of mind, and the support of someone who truly cared. James realized that protection was more than skill. It was commitment, presence, and trust in another person. The night was over, but the story was far from finished. Clara knew that the gang could return, that the danger was not fully gone. Yet she also knew something else. She was not entirely alone, and she had strength, courage, and a guardian at her side. Together they had faced a threat, and together they would confront whatever challenges came next. The sun rose over Cedar Hollow, casting soft golden light across the fields, but Clara felt little warmth in her chest. The events of the night before lingered in her mind, heavy and unrelenting. Though the gang had retreated, their presence had left a mark, a shadow that made even familiar corners of the farm feel uneasy. Clara moved quietly through her house, checking the doors and windows again, almost instinctively. Each lock and latch seemed to echo the tension of the night, reminding her that safety was fragile and trust could be tested in an instant. James was nearby, tending to the horses and inspecting the fences. His hands were steady, but the lines on his face betrayed a lingering worry. Clara watched him from the porch, noting the way his eyes scanned the horizon even now, alert for any sign of the gang's return. She felt a mixture of relief and unease, grateful for his presence but still aware of the complexity of their situation. Trust was not easily rebuilt, even in moments of survival. Finally, she approached him cautiously. "James," she said softly, her voice breaking the stillness of the morning. Why did you point your gun at me last night?" "I saw it, just for a moment, to be enough to scare me." James turned to her, his expression a mix of frustration and regret. He ran a hand through his hair and sighed, his gaze steady on hers. "Clara, I didn't mean to. I was focused on them, on keeping you safe, but in the heat of the moment, my aim faltered. I never intended to put you in danger." Clara's heart beat faster, not just from fear, but from the raw emotion in his voice. She wanted to be angry, to push him away, but the sincerity of his words softened her resolve. Still, she could not let it pass without acknowledgement.
"It doesn't feel like an accident, James."
It felt personal. James hesitated, then stepped closer, his eyes searching hers for understanding. "It was personal, yes," he admitted quietly, "but not in the way you think. I was afraid of losing you. I've been away for too long, and the thought of something happening to you, something I couldn't stop, it made me reckless. I didn't mean to scare you."
"I wanted to protect you."
Clara took a deep breath, processing his words. The mixture of fear, relief, and lingering emotion swirled in her mind. She had loved him once, deeply, and though the years had created distance, the intensity of the past did not vanish so easily. "James, I know you care," she said softly, "but fear isn't a reason to risk me. You need to trust me too. I can be careful, but you can't let your emotions cloud your judgment." He nodded slowly, acknowledging the truth in her words. "You're right," he said. "I let my feelings get in the way. I thought I was protecting you, but I see now that I need to balance that with trust. Trust in you and in ourselves to face this together." For a moment they stood quietly, the weight of their shared experiences settling around them. The danger was still out there. The gang had not disappeared, only retreated. But this conversation, honest and raw, began to rebuild the fragile bridge between them. Clara realized that survival was not just about facing threats, it was about confronting truth, emotion, and the complexity of human connection. The day passed slowly, filled with cautious activity. Clara and James reinforced the farmhouse further, moving furniture to block entrances, stacking supplies near the windows, and preparing for the possibility of another attack. Every action was deliberate, a combination of strategy and instinct. Clara felt a strange sense of empowerment. She was not just waiting for protection, she was actively participating in it. Each careful step reminded her that she was capable, resilient, and resourceful. James observed her closely, noting her attention to detail, her calm under pressure, and the quiet strength she displayed. He had come back to protect her, but he realized that she had never been powerless. She had survived on her own for years, and her ability to manage the farm, handle danger, and make decisions under stress reminded him why he had loved her in the first place. There was admiration in his gaze, but also a growing understanding that trust was a shared responsibility, not a one-sided obligation. As evening approached, the tension of the previous night still lingered. Clara and James sat together on the porch for a moment, watching the hills in the distance, where the shadows of trees stretched long across the fields. The wind carried the faint scent of smoke and earth, a reminder that the gang could return at any time. Yet in that quiet, they found a small measure of peace. They had faced danger together, and they had survived. Clara finally spoke, her voice low but firm. "James, I need to know something. Last night, when you aimed that gun at me, was it just fear, or was there something more? Something from the past that made you hesitate?" James looked down, his jaw tight with conflicted emotion. "Clara, I won't lie. Seeing you here, after all these years, knowing the danger you were in, it stirred memories. Feelings I thought I had buried. I didn't trust myself. I didn't trust how much I still care for you. That's why I hesitated, not because I wanted to hurt you, but because I was afraid of my own heart." Clara's chest tightened. She had always known that James cared, but hearing it now, in the quiet of the aftermath, made the truth undeniable. She felt a mixture of anger, relief, and longing. "James, I can't tell you that everything is simple. We have history, and it's complicated. But I need to know that you are here to protect me, not because of old feelings, but because it's the right thing to do." James met her gaze, steady and sincere. "I am here because it's the right thing to do. But I won't deny that my heart is part of it too. I want to protect you, to keep you safe, and to be here with you. Whatever comes next, I want to face it together." The honesty between them created a fragile bond, one built on shared danger, emotion, and the recognition of human complexity. Clara realized that survival was not just about fences, locks, or weapons. It was about trust, understanding, and the willingness to confront truth, no matter how uncomfortable or difficult. Night fell once more, and the farm grew quiet under the stars. Clara prepared for sleep, checking the doors, arranging the furniture, and placing the lanterns carefully. James remained nearby, keeping watch, his presence a silent reassurance. They had survived the first confrontation, but the night reminded them both that danger could return at any moment.
Clara reflected on the events of the past 24 hours.
She had faced fear, uncertainty, and the unknown. Yet she had also rediscovered a connection with James that time and distance had not erased. The emotions were complicated: fear, trust, admiration, and lingering love. But they were real. She understood that moving forward would require patience, honesty, and courage from both of them. James, too, reflected on the events of the night. He realized that protection was not just about physical presence, but about emotional strength, clarity, and restraint. He had allowed fear and old feelings to cloud his judgment once, but he would not let that happen again. Clara's trust was fragile, but it was a trust worth earning every day, in every action, in every decision. The wind carried a chill through the fields, but the warmth of understanding and shared experience softened the night. They had faced danger together, confronted fear, and survived. The threat of the gang remained, but they had proven that courage, preparation, and trust could overcome even the most daunting odds. Clara finally settled into bed, exhaustion weighing on her body and mind. She knew that the coming days would be filled with challenges, sleepless nights, tense hours of vigilance, and the possibility of renewed threat. But she also knew that she was not alone, and that James was willing to face the danger with her. That knowledge, fragile and tentative, brought her a sense of calm she had not felt in years. As she drifted toward sleep, her thoughts were filled with the complexities of their connection, the history they shared, the emotions that lingered, and the reality of facing danger together. She understood that survival was not just about avoiding harm, but about navigating the human heart, understanding motivations and accepting truth, even when it was uncomfortable or painful. Outside, James remained alert, his eyes scanning the shadows, his hand resting lightly on his gun. He understood that danger was still near, but he also knew that the greatest challenge was not just the outlaws, but the delicate balance of trust, emotion, and responsibility. Protecting Clara meant more than keeping her safe from harm. It meant being honest, patient, and steadfast, even when fear threatened to dominate. The night passed slowly, filled with quiet vigilance and the lingering weight of what had occurred. And as dawn began to touch the hills once more, Clara and James realized that the night had changed them. They had confronted danger together, faced truths about themselves and each other, and survived. The path ahead was uncertain, but they were no longer entirely alone. In the soft light of morning, Clara stepped outside, taking in the calm of the fields, the stillness of the farmhouse, and the presence of James beside her. She knew that challenges remained, but she also understood that courage, trust, and shared experience could overcome even the most daunting obstacles, and for the first time since the threat had emerged, she felt a cautious hope, a belief that survival, understanding, and perhaps even love could endure, even in the shadow of danger. The morning sun rose slowly over Cedar Hollow, casting gentle light across the hills and the farmhouse. Clara stood at the edge of the porch, her hands resting lightly on the railing as she gazed at the fields. The night had passed without incident, but the memory of danger still lingered, a quiet shadow that made her heart beat faster than usual. She took a deep breath, letting the crisp morning air fill her lungs, reminding herself that each new day brought a chance to start again, to face what came next with courage. James moved beside her, his presence a steady reassurance. He had spent the night keeping watch, ensuring that no threat approached, and though his eyes carried fatigue, there was also a calm strength about him. Clara noticed the subtle changes in him, the way he relaxed slightly now that immediate danger had passed, the way his shoulders, so tense the night before, had eased just a little. She realized that survival was not just about facing the gang, but about enduring the long hours of uncertainty, the fear that lingered even after the danger had gone. "You're quiet," James said softly, breaking the silence without turning from the horizon. His voice carried warmth, concern, and something more, an invitation to speak, to share the thoughts that had kept Clara awake much of the night. Clara turned to him, her eyes meeting his. "I'm thinking," she said simply, "about everything. About last night, about the gang, about us." Her voice faltered slightly, but she continued, determined to speak honestly. "I've spent so long trying to be strong on my own, and I am strong, but I realize now that being alone isn't always enough. Sometimes you need someone to stand with you, not just for protection, but for trust." James nodded slowly, understanding the depth of her words. "Clara, I've realized the same thing. I came back to protect you, yes, but I also came back because I couldn't ignore what I still feel. The past may have kept us apart, but it doesn't erase the care, the concern, or the connection we have. I want to stand with you through danger and through life, if you'll let me." Clara felt a mixture of emotions swell within her. Relief, hope, and a cautious warmth that had been absent for many years. She took a step closer, her gaze steady. "James, I can't promise everything will be simple. We've both changed. We've lived through hardship. But I see now that surviving isn't just about the threats outside. It's about facing what's inside, too. And I want to try, if you're willing to meet me halfway." James smiled, a rare softness in his expression. "I'll meet you halfway, Clara. I'll meet you wherever you need me." His voice was steady, filled with sincerity, and Clara felt a flutter of hope that perhaps after so much fear and uncertainty, something good could grow from the chaos. The day passed slowly, with Clara and James working together on the farm. They repaired fences that had been weakened by the gang's approach, tended to the animals, and prepared meals with quiet conversation in between. The rhythm of work brought a sense of normalcy, a fragile balance that reminded them both that life continued even after the most harrowing events. As the afternoon sun climbed high in the sky, they paused for a break. Clara poured water into 2 tin cups and handed one to James. They sat side by side on the porch, watching the field sway gently in the breeze. For a long moment neither spoke, letting the quiet of the farm envelop them. Finally, Clara broke the silence. "James, last night I realized something. I've spent so long protecting myself, guarding my heart, trying not to rely on anyone. But I also realized that sometimes sharing the burden doesn't make you weak. It makes you stronger."
James nodded, his gaze fixed on her. "I understand. I've learned the same."
Protecting someone isn't just about standing in front of danger. It's about trust, patience, and being present when they need you most. You've shown me that courage isn't just action. It's the willingness to face fear, admit vulnerability, and keep moving forward. Clara smiled faintly, the warmth in her chest growing. "Then maybe we can face the future together. Not forgetting the past, not ignoring the pain, but learning from it. And maybe trusting each other to survive whatever comes next." James reached out, gently taking her hand in his. The gesture was simple yet powerful, a symbol of shared understanding, mutual respect, and the possibility of renewed connection. Clara felt a surge of emotion, realizing that despite the danger, the fear, and the uncertainty, there was hope. Hope for safety, for trust, and for the chance to build something together once more. The evening approached, and the soft glow of the setting sun cast long shadows across the fields. Clara and James stood together at the edge of the property, surveying the land that had been the stage for so much tension and fear. The wind carried the faint scent of distant hills, the gentle rustle of trees, and the quiet reassurance of life continuing, despite the threats that had loomed so near. Clara's thoughts turned to the gang. They had retreated, but she knew they might return. Yet she no longer felt the paralyzing fear that had gripped her the night before. She had learned that courage was not the absence of fear, but the willingness to act despite it. And with James by her side, she felt a strength she had not known she possessed. James spoke quietly, almost to himself, but loud enough for Clara to hear. "They may come back, but we'll be ready. And even if they do, we'll face them together. That's what matters." Clara squeezed his hand, a silent acknowledgement of her agreement. "Together," she said, her voice firm. "No matter what." Night fell once more over Cedar Hollow, but this time the darkness did not carry the same weight of terror. The stars appeared in the clear sky, twinkling like distant lanterns guiding them forward. Clara felt a sense of peace she had not known in years, a quiet understanding that survival was not just about avoiding harm, but about facing life fully, with courage, trust, and the willingness to embrace hope. Inside the farmhouse, they prepared for sleep. The doors were secure, the lanterns dimmed, and the house seemed smaller, safer, filled with a quiet rhythm of life rather than the tension of imminent threat. Clara lay in bed, her mind reflecting on the events that had brought them here. The fear, the danger, the emotional confrontations, and the rediscovery of trust and connection. James stayed nearby, vigilant but calm. He had learned that protection was not only about action, but about presence, reassurance, and emotional steadiness. He had faced the danger of the gang, yes, but he had also faced the challenge of acknowledging his feelings, controlling his impulses, and earning Clara's trust once more. As sleep came slowly, Clara felt a sense of gratitude. She had survived the threat, yes, but she had also survived fear, isolation, and uncertainty. She had faced the possibility of loss and come through with courage and resolve, and she had found in James's presence the reassurance that life, connection, and hope were still possible. The following morning, the farm was quiet, bathed in the soft light of early sun. Clara rose and stepped outside, taking a deep breath of the crisp morning air. The fields were calm, the animals tended to, and the farmhouse stood secure. She knew the gang might return, that challenges would come again, but she also knew that she was no longer alone in facing them. James joined her on the porch, and for a long moment, they simply watched the horizon together. The unspoken understanding between them was clear. They had faced fear, danger, and uncertainty, and they had survived. The connection between them had deepened, tempered by honesty, trust, and shared experience. Clara finally spoke, her voice quiet, but full of conviction. "James, whatever comes next, we'll face it. Not just the dangers outside, but everything else too. Together." James nodded, a soft smile on his face. "Together," he agreed. The farm, the hills, and the town beyond seemed to hold their breath, a quiet witness to the strength, courage, and connection that had been forged through fear and perseverance. Clara knew that life would not always be easy, that challenges would come, and that the past would always linger. But she also knew that hope, trust, and resilience were stronger than fear. As the sun climbed higher, casting warm light across the fields, Clara felt a sense of renewal. She had survived danger, faced uncertainty, and rediscovered trust in someone she had loved and lost. The future was uncertain, yes, but for the first time in a long time she felt ready to face it. And beside her, James was ready too, steady, loyal, and committed to standing with her through whatever might come. The story of the night's terror had ended, but the story of life, trust, and connection was only beginning. Clara looked over her land, felt the warmth of the sun, and smiled faintly. She had survived, and she had learned that courage was not just in facing danger, but in embracing life fully, with trust, honesty, and hope. And together, she and James would face whatever the future held, not with fear, but with determination, resilience, and the quiet strength of hearts that had endured and survived.